All right, we'll get started. Thank you all for being here. Let's see, upcoming events. Start right from the beginning. This is me, George Dell. Bruce Hahn is our guest today. He's got a heck of a presentation. He'll be doing the bulk of it. I'll be doing about 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then Bruce will take over the main part of it. Do want to be sure you're aware that December 9th is the last offering of StatsGraphs Data Science this year, 14 hours over 3 days. And then next month, we have Lyle Radke, the Fannie Mae Director of Collateral Policy. I have seen him twice in the last several weeks. And that's our teddy bear that you see every time. The teddy bear has been with me since the beginning of these classes. This is me. I was an accident of life. I was taking a whole bunch of classes after I was already an appraiser, and later on it became known as data science. And today's guest is Bruce Hahn, an old friend of mine. I do have to tell a very short story about it, although we met many years ago when he was, I believe, chapter president of the Northern California chapter, and I was on the board of Appraisal Institute board of directors. It was after that, and he was teaching a class in supporting or proving adjustments. I said, oh, I can't miss that. And it was the official, heck, I better not go into that. Anyway, it was a class, and it was really not a very good class. I don't know how else to put it. And Bruce was there, of course, the teacher. He couldn't say things, but I was sitting in the audience saying bad things about what we were being taught. And we've been close friends ever since.
I have to add that material came and you signed up for it sight unseen, and the material was delivered after it was scheduled. And I was just very grateful you were there to point out the fallbacks, because I couldn't do that. It was perfect.
Very good, thank you. Okay, current issues. This is our topic is just one of several issues, and I've been to several conferences lately, and particularly Fannie and Freddie have been doing a lot of changes in the government agencies. Bias is a big topic, desktop appraisals, the way reports are going to be done in the future. Lyle Radke, I just heard him earlier this week in Las Vegas at the Appraisal Summit, and I had a very nice bullet point list of things that they're looking for in the near future. These are things that he mentioned. Basically, and of course, we know that technology is moving forward, and both he mentioned the need for objective data selection and moving towards reproducibility, and that made my heart sing, because most of you have been in my class, and you know that our goal is moving towards reproducibility of appraisal work, and highlighting and emphasizing the need for appraiser expertise and auditability. Reproducibility creates the ability for real auditability of reports. Our mission, Value Metrics, is to connect your expertise with the potential of today's technology. Science is a systematic study by an expert in the field of study, and that's you. It's a blend of technology, algorithms, and your ability to model properly. Okay, avoiding being accused of bias is a webinar we just had last month that went really nicely, and that's actually related to what we're talking about here, because about half of the scary stories we're hearing right now about request for reconsideration is the borrower or somebody is accusing of bias. So we need to know what bias is, what it isn't. There's two basic causes that were covered by all the speakers I've heard lately, including last month. And one of the points was that if the borrower feels a lack of respect and discourtesy on the part of appraiser, you're dramatically raising your chance of getting accused. And that, of course, triggers a whole bunch of other bad things. And another cause, of course, could be true negligence. Three basic protective measures, and this is going to be the theme probably throughout today, is specify your data selection. The day of trust me, I know a good comp when I see a good comp, those days are rapidly moving to the past. So specify your data selection, documented that, and Bruce will be talking about that a bit. Identify your competitive market segment prior to your field visit, if you're visiting the field. And CMS is the competitive market segment. Calculate your predictor adjustments from that competitive market segment, not from anything else. And again, be respectful, have an attitude of service. You are there to serve, to do a job, to do something for people. And it helps on the inside of ourselves also. So avoiding reconsideration of value, things you need to know, key issues. There's two causes. Data selection is not justified. A reviewer might talk about that. And the borrower is disgruntled. Say the appraiser came in too low or the appraiser came in too high. That's not that it's really worth. Solutions are delineate or list all your available data and provide visual graphical exposure that's easily understood not only by other professionals and reviewers and underwriters, but also by the public. Some of the stuff that we talk about is new and it may feel like it's hurting your head. Trust me, it's not above you. It's new. I agree with that. And I've taught some of the material that I teach to college students, and it's really a world of difference. College students just memorize. Adults, we need to connect new ideas with old ideas. So I understand the new stuff feels difficult, but it's really not. The math we use is very basic: add, subtract, multiply, divide, proportions. The statistics we use also, we don't use any inferential statistics, that hard stuff. It's only mean, median, maximum, minimum, range, and 2 or 3 measures of variation. Yay! I love that. Graphs, we use graphs a lot to connect the human brain with the power of the computer. They're intuitive and they're pretty. They appeal to the human visual sense, and yet they can communicate a lot of information very quickly. I'm talking fast here because I really want to leave as much time for Bruce as possible. He's got a great presentation coming up. Finally, on these bullet points, let me reemphasize your knowledge of markets and your knowledge of valuation process is the overriding consideration. All we are trying to do is bring new tools to sharpen your judgment. Our focus is on data science methods, and the subset of that is evidence-based valuation or asset analytics. We focus on data-driven models rather than judgment-driven models or discernment. Personal discernment is what does the data tell us? Let the data speak. But it has to be combined with enhanced expert judgment. And the coming changes, not quite here yet, although they keep threatening new forms. They're really not going to be new forms. They're going to be dashboards delivered by data streams, and each user will have a different dashboard. Let's differentiate between objective evidence and subjective judgment. And these are dictionary definitions. Objective is free of bias or prejudice and based on facts. Subjective is not impartial, based on opinions and feelings rather than facts or evidence. I believe this is one of the big problems we have with our entire profession, is that we are charged with delivering an opinion rather than an analytic result. And that's forever going to condemn us to opinion. I think I mentioned to you Fannie and Freddie. I've listened to Fannie representative a couple of times and the Freddie Mac people also recently. Lyle Radke, about a month ago in Frisco, Texas at the Housing Wire conference, said this: appraisers see their job as an art form. It's hard for them to rigorously explain exactly what they are doing. And the room roared. The Housing Wire group is primarily not appraisers. It was really unusual for me to be there. It felt different. They're not against appraisers, and yet I think they really see us as a partner in the deal. Freddie Mac, appraisers need to spend time on developing a market conditions analysis in the appraisal. It's truly the backbone of the appraisal. If you've been to my class, you know that's one of the things we emphasize is price indexing, market analysis, time adjustments, because it is the backbone. Okay, a couple of words here. A model, that's what you do. You make modeling decisions. In the appraisal of real estate, basically, there's three models: cost approach, income approach, and sales comparison approach. An algorithm is what the computer carries out. You make a modeling decision, the computer carries out the algorithm to give you a result, kind of like an AVM or a mini AVM. So what are we supposed to be doing? Well, clients want this. They want a tight answer right around the bullseye. This is either sloppy or just the data is bad or the nature of that particular appraisal is done. This is pretty sure, but there's bias. It's off the mark in one particular direction. Could be a biased appraiser or biased analysis. The scatter here could be just careless or a new appraiser. Or it could be a low fee ballpark appraisal. Hey, is this close enough? You know, I know that if I'm doing a loan appraisal or doing a litigation job, the difference in my fees and the amount of care I put into that is large. And then finally, true and sure that this is what we really are striving for. This would include competence and ethics and the right analysis. So what is market analysis? It's a process for examining demand and supply for a specific market segment. So what is our relevant market segment? How is it delineated? What is the trend of that market segment? So there's one big thinking change compared to traditional appraisal when we move to the methods we're talking about here to avoid these implications of bias, to avoid reconsiderations of value. Gather a few comps, compare the comps. Data is the first goal. The data science method, you download all the data you'll ever need. It becomes documented, a part of your work file, and then you chip away at it until you get to the result. Why are graphs so important? Humans are very good visually. We get a lot of information out of a tremendous amount of information out of a few data points, The brain zonks out after about 4, 5, 6 data points. That's why 3 or 4 or 5 comps works really great, but 10 or 12 does not. I've made that mistake. I don't do it anymore. However, what we're supposed to be doing is market analysis, not comp comparison. And it's definitely moving that way. We're no longer restricted by rectangular forms. Most market segments are more than 3 directly competitive sales. I mean, typically there's 4 or 5 or 10 or 40 or 400 that a typical buyer might look at. Those are directly competitive sales. And sometimes it's less than 3, right? So that's a different problem. And we also talk about ways to deal with that issue. So avoiding ROVs, getting the right data is the key throughout any of these data science methods or evidence-based valuation. You can gather data by using judgment or your discernment, say, I'm really good at this stuff, just trust me, or you can have evidence with the data itself. So one overarching concept, with evidence-based valuation, we measure markets, not compare comps. The comparing comps was totally a scientific method. When I became an appraiser, scraping together 3 or 4 or 5 comps was well over half my job, 80% of my job. Today, we push a button and 1/10 of a second, we get all the sales. Today, the challenge is figuring out what's relevant data rather than reducing it down to that. So we're focused on data evidence methods. The overall process. This is just a quick one-screen shot of the overall process of how we go at it. Download all the data you think you'll ever need, and that becomes part of your work file. And this relates to this ROV. If you've got that work file, you know exactly what you did. You've got completely trackable, traceable, reproducible data set. We explore that assignment data frame, the overall data frame. We identify from that the sales that would have been directly competitive to the subject property on the date of value. That's the most relevant data set. And we apply our predictive algorithms, which is somewhat, well, very similar to adjustments, except they're a little more sophisticated. The good news is there's only 3 basic types of predictive algorithms, just like adjustments. And then you position the subject within the market segment. I think what Bruce has coming up, you'll really see that dramatically with the use of graphs, how clear it becomes where the subject fits in that market segment. If you get the data set right, if you get the market segment right, the rest of it just falls out. It's simple, it's easy. And then deliver a documented report. And I believe strongly that 5 years from now, we will not have anything even called a report. It's going to be, we're delivering an improved data stream. And different users, underwriters, reviewers, risk analysts, portfolio managers, administrative managers, all will have different dashboards that are suited to their needs for what they need to see. There's 4 basic kinds of graphs, and when Bruce comes up here, you'll see a bar chart, you'll see a box plot, the box and whiskers, histogram, and scatterplot. Those are graphs that we use dramatically. This is an example of a price index. This is a neighborhood. So this $145 is actually a wrong number because it's the downward trend for this neighborhood. Look at the range of prices here from 600,000 down to 200,000. That's not all the competitive data sets. So this needs to be reduced down to a smaller competitive market segment. But you will get a number like this, which would be the correct time adjustment, dollars per day for that CMS. This is a CMS. Here's an upward trend. This is competitive. There's kind of one outlier here that probably ought to be checked on. It's one of the things we cover in class. We spent about half an hour, 45 minutes in the stats, graphs, and data science class just on dealing with outliers. Outliers are almost more important than your best comps. Behind the line, there's a very simple math formula. It's least squares, and that gives you your time adjustment, dollars per day. You just multiply times the number of days back, and that's your time adjustment. And it's a hard number. The only thing that can be challenged is that you picked the wrong data in the first place. Other than that, it's very logical. Here's a comparison, 2 box and whiskers or box plots. These middle lines here and here, those are the medians. So the difference between these 2 medians might compare 2 different neighborhoods or 2 different towns, or even across a freeway where you've got 2 different neighborhoods. Your basic adjustment methods, contrasting, very similar to group pair comparison, like it talks about in the appraisal of real estate, only we focus on getting the data exactly, on the methods of getting the data right, so it's not sloppy. We compare the means or medians of each of the 2 groups. Association, how do 2 variables move together? Simple regression is the primary tool there. And sequencing, putting things in order. Ordinal statistics. In my class, I always talk about your 3rd grade teacher had you said, okay, all the students line up, shortest on the left, tallest on the right. Nobody got measured, but that's ordinal information. Sequencing information is useful information, particularly for appraisal type work, because so much of our data is ordinal in nature and doesn't have a direct relationship with value. We also talk about the importance of critical thinking, the 3 types of thinking: deductive, inductive, and abductive. So we talk about critical thinking, skills, reasoning, evaluating, solving problems, decision-making, analyzing, and how that relates to the appraisal process. R, what Bruce does is done in an open source package called R. Most of you have been exposed to it already. If you haven't, don't be afraid. It's really okay. However, you need to know it's one of the most popular programs in the world today. It's designed specifically for analysis. Spreadsheets are made for accountants. Today's form software, of course, is made for residential appraisal primarily. We have a community. We just had our third annual meeting of the community of asset analysts. Perhaps Bruce can talk about that. By the way, we will reserve a little time after Bruce's presentation for questions and answers. So hold it till then. And we got several people on here. I wish I could recognize everybody who can probably answer some questions better than I can. This is what you see when you first pull up our studio. It's 4 panes. The advantage of basically our studio takes advantage of today's modern screens. See, these 4 panes are basically like having 4 monitors. So it's taking advantage of the high resolution big screens that we have. Instead of having to leave a program, cut it down, pull up another program, basically you got them right here, and all you have to do is move your eyes, and Bruce will be using that. So I wanted to give a quick introduction. The upper left-hand pane is your script or something that looks like a spreadsheet, but it's not. It's different. Down the bottom left is the console, basically what the computer screen really is. The upper right keeps track of your environment, all the field data sets and variables you've created. Down the bottom right is all the miscellaneous stuff, in particular plots. There's the four screens: the script pane in the upper left, which is where you do your work; the computer stuff on the bottom left; the history in the upper right; and then all the miscellaneous stuff down at the bottom right. So this is our studio, which is your user interface for R, which is the analytics package. It's the interface for non-programmers. Looks just like that. So that's what Bruce will be using. One thing in setting up for this, sorry, we only have an hour and a half, couple hours here today, but one of the important things is to set up your download of data in a reasonable method. Typically, only 25 or 30 fields really matter, but there's no reason not to download your complete data set, whether it's MLS or CoStar or public records. There's no reason to, there's effectively no cost to saving data today. The storage cost is minimal. And we try to put them together in a specific order. Identifiers, parcel number, address, type of thing like that. Anything to do with the transaction, motivation, financing there. We try to put the date of sale and the price of sale right next to each other so you can do a very quick trend analysis. It takes about 12 or 15 seconds, folks, if your data is set up right. It's just amazing. And then everything else, well, the spatial stuff, location features, and then everything else. So we do recommend the sequence. In my class, we talk about the 5 dimensions of similarity, which reduces the problem of is it a comp or not a comp to smaller pieces and parts, rather than saying, trust me, I've been doing this for 25 years. I know a good comp when I see one. Those days are going rapidly past. That's why we get these reconsiderations of value. I see Bruce is smiling at a minimum. Everybody else is going, argh. Okay, this is the same R Studio. You have the options of this is a black background with white. I mean, you can do everything, anything you want. Incredibly flexible. I see John Ferris is one of our members of the CAA. He's shaking his head yes, and he's totally a residential appraiser and uses our studio a lot now. I want to go through just this for just about 30 seconds or 1 minute so that when Bruce throws it at you, it's not, the detail isn't overwhelming. There's another package in our studio, or actually another program called R Markdown, which is where you create reports. It can contain the code, your pictures, your variables, your code, and the narrative you write, and any forms and tables you want. It puts everything together and helps towards reproducible work because it's all there and you leave tracks. So for example, now before I say for example, notice that this dark area here is where I do my writing. This grayish area here is the actual code. Don't be afraid of the code. There's very little you need to understand about the code other than where to steal it, where to copy it. You have to have a sense of what it is, but you don't need the code every time. It's just a reusable thing. So basically narrative stuff up here, the code here. Here's another one, part 2. I do all my explanatory writing here, which will follow up, which will show up in my report or be easily copied into my form addendum. As long as we're still stuck with old URAR, that's what we're going to do. Last line here, hist means that I'm going to create a histogram of data set 0 of the field sale price. So it'll be histogram sale prices. And there's how wide the breaks are and what color. I like red. Here's a box plot. Bruce will show you a couple of those. And I like yellow for those. That's it on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce. How to avoid reconsiderations of value. By the way, we'll do at least an hour and a half. We'll probably go on as long as 2 hours, as long as you guys want. Even after we're done, I'll certainly hang on. Bruce will, and I see several other people here that are familiar with what we do. They're more than happy to answer your questions and a little more personal. But we will have Q&A afterwards. And I just want to ask this question before I turn it over to Bruce. Where's the appraisal profession? We're under attack. A lot of changes going on, and the changes are going to be even bigger. Folks, I've been to these conferences. Just what's today, Friday? On Monday, I was listening to the fellow from the Appraisal Institute's office in Washington, D.C., the government affairs person. Very recent information. This is almost a shocker. One of the things they're thinking about doing, as an example, is taking away the AQB and the ASB and taking it out from under the appraisal foundation and putting it directly under the appraisal standards appraisal subcommittee to make it a full government sub-agency rather than a sub-part of a nonprofit agency that's, of course, is a publishing company also, as we know. Those are the kinds of changes that are coming. This is, folks, this information that I just gave you is no more than a week old. A lot of changes. So the profession changing. You have to ask yourself, where do I fit into this shift? Am I going to just hang on and then die out, or am I going to change and take advantage of the change? You can take advantage. It's not that hard. Takes willingness. Am I willing to say, yeah, I want to give this new stuff a try? I'm going to be on the front of it, not on the back end of it. It's much better not to get whipped by the tail. Remember, my message is we sharpen our judgment. You as an appraiser are best positioned to deliver the United States, the world, homeowners, consumers, people who are biased or not biased. We're in a best position to resolve so many of the problems that are being raised to the surface right now. I truly believe that. Sharpen your judgment using computer power for calculations, logic, and visualizing, seeing things. With that, I will turn it over to Bruce.
Okay, thanks, George.
And let me unshare myself here.
I think it'll let me just take over, didn't it?
Oh, cool. All right.
So thank you. And I just wanted to have a few brief slides just to set up what I'm going to do here. And we are talking about reconsiderations of value, but I think you have to back up and say, well, and George already said this, so I'm going to be brief, but I have to echo because I think it's very important. When I started out 33 years ago doing residential appraisals, it was challenging just to find enough comps to do the appraisal, and it took a lot of time, the majority of time, as George said. Now, everything has changed and we have tons of information, and the problem that I see with that is methodology has stayed the same, and we still just pick a handful of this volume of data we have to work with. And the discarding of data causes more questions than it provides answers and solutions. So I think that's the fundamental problem here. So what can we do differently? And as George has already said, we should consider all the data, use some of the data visualization is really powerful. And we got to quit discarding all of the meaningful and relevant information and deliver that to our client with analysis. And I think in doing that analysis, we're going to see some things in the information that I'm presenting. I think there's all kinds of risks that we can highlight that clients probably already are aware of, but it can't hurt us to put that information out. So I recently moved this year, a few months ago, and in so doing, I used a lot of consumer tools to find a new house. I used realtor.com. I use the app on my phone, which is amazing. And I have to say, probably as good or better than MLS. And this is all information that a consumer has. So I'm going to set this up. I'm going to look at this neighborhood in Walnut Creek, where I grew up. This is what's on Realtor. This is the default. I didn't change it. These are the sales, I think, just for the last year. You go to Zillow, and I think I have the default on Zillow for 3 years. So there's a lot of info here. And I think it's just really important to point out that the average consumer on their smartphone can scroll through each one of these. Most of these still have photos. Some are being removed now or limited. But most consumers can go through this and see exactly what's there. And they're very well informed. And yet we discard most of this information or don't even look at it by just picking the handful that we believe to be best. I think that is going to continue to create problems for us. So data science, why? And I started to do this and then left out the copyrighted characters, but I created a box here that said, characters whose plans always fail miserably. And I had Wile E. Coyote, I had Snidely Whiplash, and Tom from Tom and Jerry, right? We love watching those cartoons and see them fail every time. Lately, the news, Zillow has been in the news for failing miserably. They bought all those properties with their algorithm through their iBuyer program, relisted them, they were gonna make a killing, and they're selling them at a loss. I have nothing against Zillow. I think they are an amazing data aggregator. I like to go there and see what I can find because they are really, really good at that. Their algorithm isn't so much meant to help you figure out the value of your home. It's a loss leader or it's a carrot to pull you there for all the services that they market and sell, and they're real good at that. It drives me crazy when I talk about data science and people say, well, we'll never beat Zillow or all these other AVMs. And I beg to differ. They're black box. We don't know exactly what's in them, but they're missing the critical component that data science has. And what is data science? Well, it's a mix of statistics, mathematics, and computer power, but overriding it is domain expertise. And I think appraisers bring that to the table. Data science is being used effectively in many, many other business segments. And the domain expertise is the important part. It's how you decide what you're going to model, what you're going to include, what you're not going to, what's appropriate, what's not in the way of analyzing it. And we bring a lot to the table in that realm. The data science part is important, but it's not, you have to have the appraisal methodology knowledge and experience. So George Box was a British statistician, and he famously said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I would argue that the AVMs, many of them are wrong to varying degrees. I think we might be able to create a more useful model with our expertise. And I don't think any model can work 100% of the time. What Zillow tries to do with one nationwide algorithm is impressive just for its effort, but hard to do. So again, I'm not even going to go over this because George has already talked about all of it. So here I'm going to set up what we're going to go look at in R. This is the Woodlands and Diablo Shadows neighborhood in Walnut Creek. I think the important thing to note here is Ignition Valley Road is a 6-lane, three lanes of travel each direction, major regional thoroughfare with traffic count exceeding 75,000 cars per day. It's essentially a freeway capacity roadway. It splits these two neighborhoods. The public elementaries in the middle, they all have the same schools. Built in the 1960s predominantly, some in the 1970s. Most of the homes in the neighborhood are 3, 4, and 5 bedrooms, pretty conforming neighborhood. 2- and 3-car garages. The few homes built in the 70s tend to have the 3rd-car garage, and a third bath, where most of the 60s homes only have 2 baths. So, and if you're not familiar, this is where it's located. Here's the San Francisco Bay. It is 20 miles east of San Francisco Oakland Bridge. So here's what drew me to this, just because this house popped up and sold. And it's in this neighborhood, and I thought it was an interesting sale just because it's timely. It just sold for 1.5 million on August 24th. It listed on August 2nd, sold that day. 4 bedrooms, it's 3.5 baths. The seller had added an additional bath to this house, so that it's a little bit unusual in that regard. It has a 2-car garage, it has a fireplace, and it has no pool. Well, why was this home interesting to me? Well, because that's me at 2.5 years old on the front porch with my dad as the home is being built. And my parents lived in this home for about 40 years. Wonderful neighborhood to grow up in. I was very blessed to grow up there. Great neighborhood, still is. That said, let's go take a look at the neighborhood and what's going on. And toward that end, let's think about being an appraiser and showing up to this house in early August to appraise it as though it's pending sale at 1.5 million. And let's see if we think that this is a market-oriented transaction or if the value should be different. So let me go over here to R. And so this is dangerous. I'm just going to work openly in our studio. I guarantee you I will make mistakes or have errors, but we will work through them. That is to be expected, and it comes with it. I had a heart attack this morning. I updated all my packages, and some deprecated feature prevented me from loading my data set. So where I had it coded, we're going to have to hand load it because I could not get it to work. But there's always a workaround. So I set up parameters for this property, and I put all of the information in for our subject property. And I want to start off by saying thank you to John Ferris. I know he's here today. I pirated some code from John. John does a phenomenal job with this. He has a mean market analysis that he uses in all his reports. Thank you, John, for your willingness to share your code. We'll see some of his stuff here later. So I'm going to load the packages that we need to do this. That takes a second. And then, so again, this is all real data. It's for educational purposes only. I will flat out tell you, I don't think my analysis here is finished. Trying to keep this brief. So I think my market segment, my competitive market segment could be narrowed even more than I did, but for what we're trying to do today to illustrate things, it is what it is. So what I did, and I would narrate this here if I was writing a report, and I'm very brief, but this is what I did. I looked at all sales from January 1st of 2016 through the present time. I did this all this week. I downloaded all the sales from MLS. I stacked all the data that I wanted, the variables, downloaded it, and then for things that I can calculate, I did that myself. You can download days out on market out of the MLS, but I frequently find it's wrong. So I calculated some of that stuff myself, and we'll see that. I think that's a much better practice. The other thing that I did was I went and found the financing for each one of 267 sales I think I have. And I found the first trust deed, second trust deed, if there is one, what type of financing it is. Is it conventional, a private, government-backed loan, as well as who the lender was. We added that. I have also gone through each property and I looked at the MLS photos to determine what the condition of the property was. And my methodology there was pretty easy. If it was well, there was one home that burnt, sold for $1 million within a month of when this property sold in July, late July. Sold for $1 million, and the fire destroyed the garage, a bedroom above it, and the family room behind it, which were all razed entirely. The rest of the house is stripped to the studs. It has extensive smoke. There's some charring on some of the side and a lot of smoke and water damage. So all the drywall is gone. It's basically half of the shell of a house, and it sold for $1 million. So I ranked that as destroyed. There's only one of those. It was a data point I didn't want to discard. I might eventually have filtered it out. Then I made a category of fixer, something that hadn't been remodeled or updated in over 25 years. If you were average condition, you had at least one bedroom or bath that had been remodeled, say 10 years ago, not bedroom, but kitchen or bath. If you were good, both the kitchen and the bath had been remodeled within the last 10 years and were serviceable without much. And if you were excellent, not only were kitchen and baths pretty much newly remodeled, but really nice. And the house is turnkey, just lots of nice features added, crown moldings, extensive trim details, just the kind of house that pops. Pretty simple. Is it perfect? No, but it did set up some ways to look at different conditions in the neighborhood. So with that, this was my code. It just doesn't work. So we're going to go up here. There's about 5 ways to do absolutely everything in R. So we're going to go find the data and manually do it. It's in here. This is a CSV file. This is my data. And what all this code over here did was it specified each column as to what it was going to be. I don't want that to be a number. I'm going to make it a character. These are all right. The price is okay as a double, just means it'll take care of it as a number. I definitely want to set these as, this is specifying it as a date. I'm setting the atomic vector structure. That's R's language for this. This lets it know that it's going to be formatted month, date, and year, which is exactly the way that those appear. That's what I want. Takes a second to do each of these. This is just probably the most efficient way since my coding won't work. Make that one a date. Date. This one needs to be a date. Numbers. All good. Number. The rest, I think, look good. One other comment, I would like to have made more analysis, but my MLS, the realtors are abysmal about reporting the total number of offers. Frequently, they leave it empty. So if there's an NA, it's going to show there had to be one offer, right? Because it's sold. They're terrible about reporting that. That would be really useful information if they would put it in there. I just didn't have time to collect all that. So I'm going to go ahead and import this. We're going to get a data frame now, and it's telling us we have 267 observations of 32 variables. This looks like a spreadsheet. It's not, it's a data frame, but there's all of what we imported. So now that I have all those data points in here, we can do some more work to them to make them useful for analysis. We need to add those additional variables so that we can do some market analysis. And all I'm going to do here is take that data frame that we just created, Woodlands, and I'm going to make a new data frame just named Woodlands 2. And I'm going to use some commands to just create new columns, if you will. They're variables. We're going to make it days on the market. And again, this is simple math. There is nothing complicated about this. This is taking the pending date and subtracting the list date. That gives us the days on the market. Sales price to asking price ratio, division of those two. If there's a price change, we want to know that too. So I also calculated a sales price to the original price. I took the first and second trust deeds, added them together, divided by sold price to get the loan to value ratio. And then we're used to seeing the total baths. The MLS reports full bath and partial bath. So I did the math. So
Bruce, if I could interrupt here, Scott from Freddie Mac specifically said that these types of measures, forecast, what he called forecast measures, is what appraisers really need to start doing. The sale price, list price ratio, the time on market, the inventory. So I just want, since you're doing that, I just really want to point that out. That's what Freddie Mac is pushing for that.
And I think we'll see why it's so powerful here in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and create all these new variables. Notice now that we have another data frame. It went from 32 to 37 variables because I created 5 new. I have the condition in the original data frame, and it's those 5 categories that I made. I need to create a factor, and that's another atomic vector name. That's just R's way of handling data. And I do that by specifying the 5 conditions that I put in, and then say it's a factor, and I'm making a new column to do that. And it will create a factor. Why do I want a factor? Well, it lets me analyze data and do some data visualizations and colorize by condition, something that just really helps illustrate the market. So I have all this data. My MLS does not geocode addresses, so we're going to try this, and this may take a minute. This is using an API, a program interface. It goes to the United States Census Bureau's servers, and they have a free, it doesn't cost anything. This is all open source. It's going to geocode all of my properties and return the latitude and longitude for each one. It's going to do that. After it geocodes it, I've assigned a new data frame, and that new data frame, WDS, will have all of the old data plus 2 new variables for latitude and longitude. There it is. So now we added two variables. We now have 39 variables. So with that, we can go ahead and map all these sales now, since we have them geocoded. And we get this map. This map can be included to a client. Make this larger so that we can actually see it. Each one of these is a sale. I only have the address on here, but we can customize with any variable field that we have. We can add that in here. Just shows all the sales over the last 6 years. And this, by the way, we can, with that factor, I could put condition on these and have each sale be a different color to show the conditions. So I'm barely scratching the surface here with what we can do. Let's explore it. Let's take a look at this market. We have 266 sales. Let's make a histogram that shows how this market is spread out. And remember, this is a 6-year, nearly, or too much shy of a 6-year period, 2016 through 2021, the first 10 plus a week, 10 months plus a week. Sales kind of start 800,000. We have some outliers here. I can't explain this sale, but I left it in. We could look at the same data in a box plot. I like to turn my box plot on the side so that it lines right up with this. And this is just showing us the same distribution of data. But we understand the market this way. The predominant home in the last 6 years seems like it's trading in here, and the median shows that a little bit higher. It's spread this way. We have some outliers. Let's go ahead and take a look at a scatter plot and see what's going on here. I'm going to blow this up so that we can see it. So this is really hard to grab and pull. Why doesn't it want? It's because it's black on black. There we go. That makes it a little easier to see. So from 2016 on, we have just a flat linear model. And then we have a third order polynomial that shows more closely follows the actual trends. And what's going on here? This market is definitely moving upward, and it's accelerated in the last year, hasn't it? Clear upward trend. Most of these homes are fairly competitive with each other. There's definitely some outliers in here, but that's 266 sales over the last almost 6 years. Well, let's keep exploring this data. So thank you, John Ferris. This is your work. It's beautiful. John has taken a box plot, and this happens to be the living area, and then the red dot represents where the subject falls in the market range of square feet. There's some outliers here, but clearly we're in the market norm. We're not outside of it. I did the same thing, stole John's work again, and I simply modified it to show the lot size. And this could normally make me go, and I think this comes back to your domain expertise. I just happen to know these look like outliers. They're huge lot sizes. They're not. And I know the reason that we're here is the zoning for this house is R8.5. It's 8,500 square feet. Most of the rest of the neighborhood is zoned R10 or R12. So you get these larger lots. These lots all happen to be located on either side of Ignition Valley Road, which just has this horrendous traffic noise. It's these lots. Well, some of those sales don't pop up. It's things that back to other stuff. Also, these aren't exactly positioned, so I don't know. Some of these lots, though, are, well, it's these two. These lots are huge to buffer from the roadway. And some of these have 30 and 40,000 square foot lots. Notice that the houses are all as far away from the road as they can get. The larger lot doesn't mean anything. It's because of the roadway. So knowing that about your market explains a lot of this. So I would say that these sales, although much larger, the land, it doesn't do anything but buffer the noise and kind of offset that. So how can we further explore this and position the subject property in our market? I have to stop here too and say, I have all this stuff. This looks really intimidating. George said it. I want to repeat it. I'm going to say it again. There's nothing complicated about this. It is all new. I have about 5 different code chunks in here. I copy and paste each one of these. I open a new code chunk, paste it in. I change the variable I'm attempting to model, and maybe the words, which are the labels. That's about all I do to keep reproducing these. It looks like a lot of work. It's not. It's really fast to do. We can look at each variable and we can add a line that positions the subject. How did I do that? This is the subject parameter data up from the top here for a bedroom. When I took the time to enter all these, it's pulling that. The subject parameter, it's a data frame essentially. And then the $sign, and we add BR for bedrooms. It's got 4 bedrooms. So when we go down here to look at that, we've positioned the subject on the market. This market is pretty heavily weighted to 4 bedrooms. So we're right in the middle of the market there. Same thing for baths. The bath, in the case of this subject property, is the outlier. They added another full bath, which is unusual. I just kept exploring the market data here. So here's the garage. This market, it looks like a 2-car garage is expected, almost all, and that's what we have. The 3-car garages were built, the newer homes, there's probably, I would expect that there's about 1,000 homes in this neighborhood, maybe slightly less, and probably 10% were built in the 70s, late 70s, and have the 3-car garage or a 3rd bath that was original. Just trends were changing by then. You can just keep exploring all these things. Fireplaces, almost every home has 1. A few have 2, some have none. There's only a couple. We're right. We're just showing where the subject fits in the market. I think these would all help you decide, is this something that's going to really require adjustment? The bath? Is somebody really going to pay a ton extra for this? I don't know. But it tells you this is maybe one to look at. These probably don't really light my fire. We're right in the middle of the market. I think this is a useful tool to help guide you to finding sales and or adjustments for your property, how it fits in the market. Mix of 1 and 2 story, we're a 2-story, slightly less of those. Pools. So most homes don't have a pool. I would say less than a third do. Certainly points out, again, functional issues with the pool. Is it desirable? If you get into a neighborhood where it's lower than this, that might really indicate some of that. There are other neighborhoods where I would expect this to be a lot higher. And I think these are just good tools. I didn't put it on all of these, but the subject doesn't have a pool. I thought this was pretty interesting. This is the financing for all 266 sales. So about 13% were all cash. I hear a lot of talk from appraisers especially, but realtors also. All cash. There's tons of cash buyers in this market. Well, maybe there are. In this neighborhood, I don't think that's an astounding number. The vast majority are financed with conventional loans. There were, I think, 3 private loans and 3 VA loans in this neighborhood out of 266 sales. So this neighborhood, to me, is pretty heavily reliant on conventional loans for purchases. Here's the condition. Once we create these factors, notice too that these aren't alphabetical. I created an order in how I structured this factor, and it's based on the quality increasing. 1 destroyed property by fire, small number of fixers, average. Most properties in this neighborhood are good. This is a desirable place. People improve their home and keep it up. We are in the excellent category for the subject property. I didn't label it. Just keep exploring this. So with that factored condition, we can take these 266 sales and look, we can see the destroyed properties hiding. I think it's in the middle of all that under it. The fixers on the bottom, the average sales kind of blend. This color palette may not be the best. They blend, hard to see. They blend with the fixer. The goods are the blues and the excellence are the pink, kind of layered upward, what we would expect to see. course, this is based on size as well. We could look at this different ways. I just put price against size and then laid color on it. There might be a better way to look at that. I might want to explore it more. So we can use all these tools, and with this factor, I can create factored box plots. This is the market range for each independent condition. There's only the one destroyed sale. And we get a small group, so some outliers. This purple line I added because that represents the subject's sale price. So we're clearly within the market range for excellent properties. Doesn't surprise me that we're at the top because we're within the last couple of months of a 6-year range. So that kind of makes some sense to me too, because some of these sales will need some time adjustment, I would suspect. So here's a bar chart that just shows when the homes were built, the distribution of that. And there's one home, I think that was the original farmhouse that's been preserved. That happens to be one of the homes on a large lot on an acre. The rest of these, most of these were built in the late 60s. In fact, I think this is 1967 when I'm standing on that porch. A few by 1980, it was done. There's one pocket where they tore another farmhouse down and built a handful of homes. That's it. That's the neighborhood. So I think this is a really interesting peek into the neighborhood. This is a histogram of loan to value. This is the cash sales with no loan. I don't know why, but somebody got $100,000 loan on a 1.1 or $1.2 million sale. I guess that's what worked for them. And you start along here, and it looks to me like at about 50% to 90% is where most properties are financed. And of course, this is an 80% loan to value. This neighborhood is heavily reliant on mortgage transactions to facilitate purchases. And here's the same data on a box plot. It really shows that 80% loan to value. So looking at the market, this is so easy to do. Why don't we do this? This is the last 6 years. This is over a time. This is a time series analysis based on the sale date. How many days on the market did it take for a property to sell? And then this is just the trend line. And what is that telling us? It was, this is 50 days. So this is a 1 week to 2.5 weeks. What are properties selling for? They're going down to 1 day on the market on average. And look at the variance here. These properties that were probably way overpriced and had price reductions before they finally sold to this is the outlier now at 2.5 weeks. Everything else is just selling immediately. Lot, I think, comes out of that chart. So then looking at the sales to asking price ratio, and I just have to say this is crude. This is an exploratory graph. I would refine some of these to go into a report. I think this graph could be made much prettier and much easier to read if the reference line was set at 1.0 and some are below it and some are above it to give reference for the asking price. But it still shows us a lot, doesn't it? 103 to 104%, and then it got back down real close. And then look what's happened. The trend line shows that we're nearing 100 and probably 18% is the typical sales to asking price ratio. This is more of an auction than a free market, in my opinion. And then I looked at the same thing with the sales to original price. And of course, there isn't a great deal of difference here. I mean, there's some that sold with a lot of reductions that were overpriced. We're obviously going a little lower, but there's very few sales that are having price reductions. So the charts are very similar, but it's still worth looking at, I think. So what am I missing here? I think, and just in the interest of time, I didn't go there, but we could very easily, with just a couple lines of code, calculate how many sales were listed each month while all these sales were occurring during this 6-year period. And we could easily go to MLS and get the number of sales that are active and see what's the inventory and how long will it take to get through that. I think that's the missing piece here that I didn't do for market analysis, but it's so easy to do. It wouldn't take a whole lot more work. And I think those pieces put together a pretty big tale about what's going on in the market. And just with this, what can we say? We can say that the market in the Woodlands is pretty reliant on conventional financing and Most homes are looking for an 80% loan to value with conventional lender. During the last year, the market's just crazy. Most homes are selling, if they're appropriately priced, they're selling within a week. And there's a bidding war on most homes. They're selling for 10 to 20% over an appropriate asking price. That doesn't take a whole lot of words because we have these powerful graphs to set it up. I think an important thing here that these graphs don't communicate, and there really isn't data to support, is that, and I put this in all caps because these conditions indicate very positive buyer sentiment right now. And I think that's an important thing to note in the market conditions. And as soon as some of this stuff changes, I think the change in buyer sentiment will be what drives that. That's just an aside. I think too, there's so much more that I could have put in here. Just some trends about interest rates, inflation, the rates that we're seeing on these. You can go in and get some of the rates. I think most of these are selling with a 3% 30-year fixed loan. And when you look at the inflation data that's going on, those are a real negative rate, meaning that the actual interest rate, when you consider the effects of inflation, it's lower than the inflation rate. So it encourages people to borrow and spend their money. And I think that's a huge issue. I think lenders are aware of that, but I think that's on us to report some of that information and just to add another couple sentences here to the risks. I think that's worth the words because you might be glad you wrote that somewhere down the road. So now that we've kind of explored the market, I think it's time to filter down and get to a more meaningful data set. Certainly, given these changes that are going on, nothing much after 2020 is going to be meaningful, or before 2020 is probably meaningful in our analysis at this point. So let's just take a look at those. I just filtered this data set, bedrooms between 4 and 5, and everything from the last 2 years. And then I arranged them by descending by the date sold. So we now have a new data frame. Because I changed the number of variables downward from 266 to 86, I have to create a new factor for the conditions because it won't work to try and match. It doesn't know what I filtered out from the factor that we made. So I just have to make a new one. So we'll get a new one for those 86 sales. Now we can start to look at these. Everything is still geocoded, so I can make a map again. Less sales. This is the Woodlands part. This is Diablo Shadows neighborhood below. Much more active, much larger. Potentially, I could filter these sales out through more exploratory analysis. Let's take a look at a histogram. We've removed more of the outliers now. That's where we're at. The box plot shows the same thing. No more outliers. Once again, looking at this with John's code, now we're kind of right in the middle of the square foot is pretty typical. Lot size is still going to be stilted because we're at the low end. So now let's just take a look at the scatter plot for this refined. We only have the most recent sales in here. What is this telling us about this market? Because the linear model is underneath in blue, and the third order polynomial pretty much covers the linear model. This market isn't much changing, is it? It's just going up pretty steadily. I still cannot explain this one sale. I pulled it up and looked at it. It's a 1-story home. It's beautiful. It's not a lot different than this such property, which is extensively remodeled, nor many of the other ones, but it's sold for way more than anything else. And I don't have an understanding for why. I would want to call and find out if there was something crazy left in the garage or why somebody paid so much money for that home, because it's a complete outlier. So from this, we can obviously see that prices are going upward. We can get the coefficients and determine from the slope what the rate of increase is. And what this chart is telling us here is prices are going up $603 a day. well, a penny less after rounding. Does that make sense? In 365 days, that's about $220,000. And that is about the increase over the last 2 years, which just astounds me. It's close to 450,000 just from looking at the chart. That's staggering, but that's what the market's telling us. So we have a time adjustment. We can very easily now go to every sale and calculate all of these 86 sales. We could calculate the number of days between our pending sale. Well, this is the date it closed. I'm using that because we have the luxury of looking back. We'd use the pending date probably, which was the 2nd instead of the 24th. But I'm taking that date, and I should have used the parameter up above. I did not. And we just subtract. This is that data frame that we're working in, that we narrowed to 86, and we're using the variable of date sold. We're subtracting it. We get the number of days. To that, we pull the coefficient. This is, I made a model here, market conditions from the linear model of price versus sale date. The slope, this is a simple vector. It's got 2 items in it. This is item 1, this is item 2. So to get this slope, we just call the coefficient of market conditions, and we specify that we only want the 2nd item in the vector. And so it's going to put, I'll just show you, well, after we make it, it will put $606 or $603 in every single sale, every single of the 86 observations that we have. And then to calculate an adjusted price for each sale, I tell it I want it as a number because we're working in days. And if you don't, you'll get an answer in days because that's carried through. I'm going to take this market condition adjustment, which is the $603 a day. I'm going to multiply it each sale by the number of days that changed. And I have some sales that are after mine. So there's some modeling decisions here that might not give us the best answers. Some of these are going to be negative time adjustments, and we might want to just exclude those future sales, and we might not, because they're modeling decisions. But it's just simply the daily rate times the change of days. And then I added, that's just the appreciation. And then you have to add the sale price back to it to get the adjusted price. So if we do all these, we've now created those additional variables. We can go up here and see the market condition adjustment. It's that rounded $603 a day for every sale. And we now have an adjusted price for each sale. I can make a table. I can display the math if that's what we want to do. There's no limit to what we can't do. Understand, I'm just not doing it because we only have about an hour and I don't have time to do all that and show it to you. But it can be done and it's not hard to do. So if we take a look at the scatter plot now of these time adjusted sales, I'm sorry, these are not the time adjusted sales. This is the sales in the last 2 years by condition. There's the destroyed sale, which isn't hiding as bad. The fixers are the olive. Average is green, blue is good, pink is excellent. I added the subject here in a purple line. That's the sale price at 1.5 million. We are this many square feet. Are we kind of in the market? It looks that way to me. And this is just an exploratory tool. Once I've seen this, kind of starts me down the path that maybe all these things start to add up, that the sale makes sense. We can do the same thing with our time adjusted data. Now notice that when we made a market condition adjustment that we extracted from the market, the pattern tightens a lot. And we now have a much tighter pattern. We're still right in the middle of that market pattern.
Bruce, it's a good time for me to interrupt one more time. With 1 or 2 graphs like this, and somebody gives you a request for reconsideration, why didn't you use this comp? Or why is one graph like this? I did. It's that one.
It's one of these.
It's one of those. And you pointed out to them. If you can put this graph in your report, you're done. In 2 minutes, you're done answering that question, or you prevent it happening in the first place. Thank you.
Where's the bias in this, or the exclusion? There isn't any. So again, we're just still exploring the data. Back to the conditions. This is the raw sale price in the last 2 years. This is the subject sale price. This is the distribution by condition. And I still think this is a meaningful thing to include, that destroyed. This is not much more than land value, foundation. I'm not really sure that the remaining improvements add that much to it, but we're close to a land value there. And then, as George said, don't we have an adjustment here for condition between each group? I think we do. Pretty heavily lays out what the market value contribution is for the depreciated improvements in these conditions. Pretty hard to argue it, at least. There might be a better way to come up with it. I can't think of it. So here's the same thing. After we make time adjustments, because this is 2 years, we narrow each of these. And now, after time adjustment, not only are we falling within the excellent category, but we're within the good one too. The market just tightened because we adjusted for the 2 years of time. Hard to argue these. So for those of you that don't like graphs, I don't know what's wrong with you, but here is more code that I stole from John. And thank you, John, for being gracious and sharing this. This is a chart. This is an amazing package that John has worked with a lot, and I haven't explored it enough, but I need to. And this is a great chart that John put together. And I still think that this doesn't even come close to the full potential of this. I'm pretty convinced that you could make comp data sheets for each sale and just push the data in. You could put photos in. We haven't even come close to touching the potential of a lot of this. So here's a chart of only the first 25 sales, I think. It's grouped by no pool and by pool. And it just gives, this is just what's in here. I edited a little bit of what John had. Could I add the adjusted sale price over here? Yes, I could. Could I just show the adjusted price? Yes. Could I show the math and how it's created in one chart? I could. But there's just no end to what you can do here. And it groups it, gives the summaries, gives the range, the median and the mean. Be pretty easy here, I think, to see that a pool probably doesn't just, maybe we don't have enough data, but there doesn't seem to be a whole great deal of difference. I suppose the item that's missing here is condition. I didn't add that to this chart. That would be meaningful too, but at any rate, this is just another tool within R to show and display data.
Bruce, are you showing a graph? Because I'm not seeing.
I'm sorry. I assumed that enlarged chart would show. Here is the graph. You can see that now, right?
Yes.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I'll go back and show you. It's just included, and I don't, the sales on the top here have no pool. It's grouped by pool type. And I probably should change the label on that to say pool or no pool and pool down here. There's less homes with a pool. That goes back to the distribution that we saw, but we're showing the market range from a low to a high, the mean and the median. There's almost no difference. So the pool might not contribute a whole lot to value. At any rate, there's so many tools here. I want to go back, share a couple more slides. Let me share. Okay, so a shameless plug for George, and I just have to say a thank you to George, because I took stats graph and data science in 2015, I think. I've been more than a dozen times since. I still learn something every time I go. If you want to learn more about this, I would highly encourage you to do it. I've told George over and over, this makes appraisal fun again. I'm still learning with this, but just what you can do is huge. I think there's a tremendous future. The need for more modern valuation tools is huge. George has a lot of this. Stats graphs and data science is online in December. It's going to be live in Boston. You might look at the asset analyst report. It's online. Lyle Radke is next month for this webinar. You might want to tune into that. I have one last thought. How in the world could you do a fraction of what we just did on our old friend, which I believe is now a dinosaur? Great in its day, set you up for all kinds of problems today. And the only thing I think that this thing does is leads to more questions than it provides answers, because it constrains you in what you can report. So I think this dinosaur won't be around much longer, and that's too bad, but it's also good. And my final thought here is, when we're asked to reconsider value, if we did all of what we just did, what is there to reconsider? What kind of bias did we show by using all available and relevant market data? When we include 80 something sales in the end that we think are the most relevant, we didn't really leave anything unturned, and we could even narrow that more and still be including all relevant market data. Plus the fact that we started with 260 sales over 6 years, there's really nothing that we didn't leave. I will say the only other problem is MLS doesn't have 100% of the sales. So we might have excluded something. It still has enough. I think we're probably okay, but that is a pitfall. We utilized all appropriate sales and excluded none. Caveat, we might have missed off MLS sales. They do exist. That's something to be aware of. With that, that's really what I had. I will turn it back to George, or be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much. If you want to give him a hand, wave your hand or something, I really appreciate it, Bruce. Let me just figure out where I'm going here. Okay, if you have this feeling right now, we understand. I want to remind you that you have in your background, if you're an appraiser, hundreds of hours of education and doing appraisals the traditional way and filling out those old forms and just doing things the way they've been done for about 80 to 90 years. So this is new stuff. We've only had an hour or an hour and a half here. I do want to recognize, well, not necessarily recognize, I see a whole bunch of people here that I know. A couple of people I'm not going to mention because they probably want to stay anonymous. But certainly Joe Lynch, who's taught the class with me and assisted several times, Scott Jura, Lee Hill, Jason's going to be helping me. I know I'm forgetting people, and I apologize for that. But I would like to have a couple of words from Joe and Scott, if you guys would, before we open it up for questions.
You know, running analysis like this in R really makes your reports bulletproof. I mean, when you put that table in there, here's the 25 most recent sales in the past year, and you know, you're working on a 2,000 square foot house, and they come back and say, well, what about this one? It's like, you know, please see the table, it's in there, and I explain, you know, why I chose the ones in that table that I chose. And with that combined with some of the graphs that are in there, where you put in some of the box plots that show where the subject falls in relation to the rest of the neighborhood, or just your CMS. I mean, it's this type of material that is available that R can do for you it really makes those reports bulletproof. And I rarely get a reconsideration of value anymore, unless it is from, you know, that crazy agent that throws you the 3,000 square foot house that sold for 700,000 when you're working on an 1,800 square foot house. You're like, well, it's not really relevant, buddy. I know it supports your value. It's higher than your sale price, but it's not really relevant. Those are about the only reconsiderations of value I get back now.
John does nothing but residential work, and then Joe's up next after the comment here, and Joe also does nothing but residential, I think. So go ahead. Joe Lynch, would you like to share anything? Joe's helped me teach the class more than once.
First of all, I'd like to say hi to all my friends across the country. I see a lot of names that I haven't seen in a long time, like Shannon. Nice to see you, and Bill from Louisiana. So it's great to see you. I got to reiterate, moving to a process like this is a lot more fun. I'm not a big, I like houses type guy. A house is a house is a house. What I enjoy is doing the analysis. And when I started taking George's stuff excuse my language, 12 years ago, 13 years ago now, it really opened up my eyes to how much fun my profession could be. It made the job much more enjoyable to me. So I I'd encourage everyone here who's interested in what Bruce has shown off to sign up for George's classes if you haven't taken them. And I've been in at least 10, probably more than 10 over the years. And as Bruce said, I learned something new every time. So it's worth the investment.
Well, one of the benefits of not being tied in with one of the larger organizations is that I'm able to stay up with the technology and the changes that come on an instant basis practically. I often jokingly say the class changes 5 to 10% every time I teach it. And it's true because it's number one, I'm learning how to teach it better. Number two, I'm learning myself on how to do things better. Scott Jury, are you there? You want to share a couple of words?
I'm here. I take the class every time. I kind of feel like I'm in the Tesla with my gas pedal to the floor at a ludicrous speed. I feel like a cross between the driver in that Tesla and the dog with his head out the window, getting the breeze in his face like that fire hose, trying to keep up with Bruce and John and Joe. I'm getting there. One thing I would mention, I'm going through the 2023 USPAP update, and I see they're very concerned about the use of fair, average, and poor without including some description of what that is. They think it may hint at bias if the reader has a different opinion of those they call them vague terms. I think Bruce described them very well, but we may want to start including more of that in our reports just defensively.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll open it up for questions. Just turn on your microphone and jump in when there's a break. Whenever somebody takes a deep breath, jump in.
Or you could raise your hand and use the hand,
Oh,
raise
yeah.
your hand on
Oh,
the
okay.
reactions.
Okay, if you haven't met Cindy, she's the ruler here. By the way, I have to say nice words about Cindy. We could not do this without Cindy. She runs the show. She's the director and producer here. And I really appreciate she does an incredible job. Who else? Any comments are okay too. It's really okay.
Abdur made a comment in the chat about the desk reviewing comps is a big part of cleaning up the data.
Are you there, Abdur?
He says he doesn't have a microphone.
Oh,
I would
no.
agree with him.
I have to send him one.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I think I will just say that compiling the data took longer than the analysis did here. And I think that's an important thing to highlight. Rather than merge things, I just took my data download and I had to go through and look up each sale to get the loan information. And I'd also spent time looking at each of the photos to determine condition. I think there's probably more work that I could have done that I didn't in looking at different things, the lot sizes that I mentioned. Some of those maybe I should be focused on. I think the point Abdur makes is a good one. Sitting at your desk and looking at these after you download them is really important, because if you don't categorize or analyze the data correctly, it's not going to tell you what you needed to.
If you have any ideas for future presenters for the webinar, I'm planning on doing this monthly webinar every month and indefinitely. It's worked really well, and we're getting some big names. All right, unless there's any other questions on the chat, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Tell your friends and neighbors, and we're going to help save the world.